The silence began with a sharpness that could slice open a morning. No sirens, no warnings, just a black SUV gliding through a quiet suburban street, its windows tinted like secrets, its license plate invisible to the local patrol database. The officer, a seasoned cop with a military past, tapped the side of his holster as the alert came in. Possible vehicle match linked to a break-in hours earlier. Same make, same color. A black man driving alone. Suspicion didn't knock. Kicked the door in. He pulled the cruiser behind the SUV, tires whispering against the asphalt. No one was speeding. No lane was crossed. But in the officer's mind, something didn't feel right. He didn't radio for backup. He wanted this moment alone. Control the scene before the scene controls you. That's what they drilled into him at the academy, especially in high-risk traffic stops, especially when things don't add up. What didn't add up was power cloaked in calm composure, draped in a suit and silence. The driver's hands gripped the wheel steady, but the officer's voice cracked through the speaker. Step out of the vehicle now. Inside that car sat the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Marshall Tate. And in that moment, in full view of a convenience store security cam, a smartphone held by a nervous onlooker, and the blinking light of a dash cam, a cop raised his weapon at the man who led the most powerful domestic law enforcement agency in the country. His finger curled, eyes hard, breath held. The man behind the wheel didn't flinch. He didn't yell. He didn't panic. He just spoke. You're making a mistake you won't be able to unmake. This wasn't a dramatic action movie. It was a real moment that would ignite a firestorm of headlines, legal debates, civil rights outrage, and millions of views on platforms craving content that exposes systemic bias, racial profiling, and the real meaning of justice in America. Not because of who the man was, but because of what the moment revealed. This wasn't about badges or ranks. It was about assumptions, about power meeting the mirror of its prejudice, about how law enforcement without checks and education can become a loaded gun pointed in the wrong direction. And while the officer didn't yet realize it, the footage was already uploading, already syncing with hashtags, already forming the spine of a story that would flood TikTok, YouTube Shorts, and primetime news. This was no ordinary traffic stop. It was the spark before a national conversation. And it all began with a man, a car, and a question too many still face. What does safety mean when you're the wrong person in the right place? A nightmare in Maple Ridge. The air in Maple Ridge was always a little too still, like a town unsure whether to wake up or keep sleeping through the truth. A tidy community tucked outside Atlanta, it had charm. Tree-lined streets, Saturday farmers markets, and the kind of low crime statistics that made real estate agents smile. But beneath the white picket fences and neighborhood watch signs, something else simmered, unspoken, unmeasured, and unrecorded. Officer Ray Beckett knew these streets like the back of his calloused hand. A 10-year veteran of the force, former military, he was the department's go-to for non-standard stops. He had a reputation for assertiveness, firm presence. The captain called it. But around town, folks whispered he didn't like being questioned, especially by people who didn't look like him. At 8:12 a.m., dispatch pinged his cruiser with a soft chime. Black SUV, tinted windows, Georgia plate, possible match to a vehicle spotted near a morning burglary. He didn't hesitate. It wasn't about race, he'd say later. It was about instinct, about patterns. The kind of pattern no algorithm could verify, but one that made him tighten his grip every time a certain profile came into view. What he didn't know, couldn't have known, was that the man inside the SUV wasn't part of any pattern. He was the one who built the protocols that people like Beckett swore to follow. Marshall Tate wasn't just the FBI director. He was a symbol of post-racial progress, the rare figure who rose through the ranks not by optics, but by results. A constitutional scholar, anti-terror negotiator, and former U.S. attorney, his mere presence in a courtroom could recalibrate the tone of an entire hearing. But power doesn't wear a badge in public. It rides quietly with tinted windows and GPS blackouts. That morning, he'd chosen to drive himself to a confidential meeting with the Georgia governor. No entourage, no flashing lights, just calm precision and a mission that didn't include being stopped at gunpoint on a quiet stretch of Oakwood Avenue. The breaking point the second Beckett pulled behind the SUV. Something shifted. He didn't call for backup, didn't double-check the database. He radioed in a quick vehicle matched, going in. And that was it. Inside the black SUV, Tate heard the siren lights click on behind him. Not wailing, just flashing, cautious, and commanding. He glanced at the rearview mirror and knew instantly this wasn't protocol. He slowed, signaled, and pulled over under a canopy of pine trees. The morning sun cast long shadows on the asphalt. He didn't reach for his phone. He didn't call ahead. He waited. Beckett approached like he'd done 100 times before, right hand hovering near his belt, left tapping the door frame with calculated intent. "Roll down the window," he said, voice flat, almost bored. Tate complied. "Can I ask what this stop is for?" The question wasn't defiant, just measured. Beckett didn't answer right away. He squinted, looked over the dash, noted the lack of registration display, and muttered, "License and registration." That was when things got quiet again. "I can provide identification," Tate said, "but I believe your system might not recognize this vehicle's details. It's government-protected license and registration." "License and registration," Beckett repeated. Slower this time, like talking to someone hard of hearing. Tate reached slowly for his inside jacket pocket. Beckett stepped back and unlatched the snap on his holster. That gesture, small, practiced, and chilling, was all it took for the man who directed federal agents across 50 states to realize this wasn't about a vehicle description anymore. It was about perceived control. There were no sirens, no screaming, no shouts exchanged. Just two men, two realities, and the tightrope between law and judgment. Tate's fingers paused just above his inner pocket. He wasn't afraid, but he was calculating. Every motion, every glance now had stakes. As a black man, he'd learned early that composure wasn't a suggestion. It was survival. As a federal director, he understood that perception could escalate faster than truth. His voice remained level. "Officer, before I move any further, I want you to be aware. My name is Marshall Tate. I am the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." Beckett blinked, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face like a passing cloud. Then something darker settled in. It wasn't the shock of recognition. It was the refusal to believe. "Out of the car," he said, his hand now fully gripping the holstered gun. The words weren't shouted, but they were loaded. Tate kept his eyes steady. "I'm reaching for my wallet with my right hand." Slowly. Beckett didn't answer. His silence wasn't caution. It was tension coiled like wire, the type of silence that filled courtrooms just before verdicts. And that's when a civilian across the street standing by a coffee truck quietly pulled out their phone and hit record. The camera's red light blinked like a warning flare, but Beckett didn't see it. Tate retrieved his wallet, unfolded the ID panel, and held it out just outside the window. His badge gleamed in the morning light. Golden, unmistakable FBI credentials, Level 1, federal clearance. Beckett didn't move to take it. His eyes scanned it, narrowed, then glanced up at Tate's face. "Nice forgery," he muttered. That sentence, captured clearly on video, would be replayed on news networks, in courtrooms, on YouTube reaction channels, and in digital rights forums for months. It was the hinge on which the narrative would turn, because it wasn't just a dismissal of identity. It was an assertion of power over truth. Beckett didn't see a federal agent. He saw a black man with a badge, and something in him rejected it. Not out loud, not violently, just coldly. The tension cracked open wider when Beckett took a step back and unclipped his holster. The gun didn't rise yet, but the weight of that motion pressed against the air like a storm front. "Sir, I'm ordering you to step out of the vehicle," he repeated. "We'll verify your identity at the station." Tate stayed still. His voice, when it came, was low and sharp. "That won't be necessary. And if you draw your weapon, you will be held accountable for every second that follows." For the first time, Beckett hesitated. A flicker of conflict, doubt perhaps, but ego is a dangerous second opinion. "Out now," he said louder. And this time, the gun cleared the holster. The camera across the street kept rolling. Inside the SUV, Tate pressed a discreet panic switch near the steering column. A silent ping was sent to the FBI's regional response team. 5 blocks away, a blacked-out Suburban sprang to life. The agents inside didn't know who was in danger, just that their director had triggered a high-risk alert. On Oakwood Avenue, the world kept moving. A cyclist pedaled by, headphones in, oblivious. A dog barked from a porch. And across the street, a teenage girl live-streamed the standoff under the title, "Something's Happening." Guy in suit being held at gunpoint. Hashtag Maple Ridge. Within 6 minutes, that clip would be on Twitter. Within 15, on Reddit, and within 24 hours, on every major outlet from CNN to the Daily Wire. But in this moment, all of that was still in the future. Right now, the only thing that mattered was the space between a loaded weapon and a man who represented the highest law in the land, and the terrifying question of whether that law could protect him when it didn't wear a uniform. When the lens becomes Justice Beckett's knuckles tightened around the grip of his sidearm, sweat trailing down the back of his neck as if his body sensed what his pride refused to admit. He'd crossed a line, but crossing it wasn't what unsettled him. It was the man's composure. Director Tate remained seated, hands visible, posture unshaken. There was no trace of panic, no begging, just a stillness that defied everything Beckett expected from a suspicious stop. And that defiance, silent and dignified, was gasoline to Beckett's flickering sense of control. The officer moved closer. The barrel was aimed just off-center toward the windshield. "Final warning. Get out now." Tate didn't budge. But what he did do, slowly and deliberately, was turn his head and look Beckett in the eyes. It was not a stare of fear, nor of anger. It was a warning wrapped in patience. "You're being recorded," Tate said, "by at least 2 angles I can count. So whatever you do next, make sure it survives playback." Beckett blinked, his brain catching up to what his adrenaline had blurred out. The teenager across the street was still holding her phone, now speaking into the mic. "It's still going. He's got a badge. He's not yelling." The cops freaking out. At that moment, the situation evolved beyond the 2 men. It became a spectacle. And spectacle has consequences in the age of real-time digital accountability. The keywords, police misconduct, unlawful traffic stop, racial profiling, were already being typed into tags and titles without either man knowing. Beckett took a half-step back, muttering into his shoulder mic, "Subject is non-compliant. Possible federal impersonator. Requesting immediate." He paused, unsure what to say next. "Backup arrest authority." None of it fit, because if he acknowledged the badge, he'd have to admit he escalated on an officer of the federal government with no verified cause. And if he didn't, he'd be on the hook for ignoring a legitimate ID. His next words were hollow. "Stay in the car." As if Tate had moved. That moment of retreat might have de-escalated things if not for the second camera car pulling into view. A black Suburban, dark windows, government-grade plates. It didn't flash lights. It didn't screech to a halt. It just coasted into position, silently, taking up space behind Beckett's cruiser. And that was when Beckett's instinct finally turned to alarm. He spun around, weapon lowered slightly, but still unsafely raised. A man in tactical plainclothes stepped out, earpiece glinting in the sun. "Sir, lower your weapon. Step away from the vehicle." It was not a request. It was an order. And it came not from a rival cop, but from a trained federal response agent, voice calm, practiced and firm. Beckett hesitated. "Who the hell are you?" The agent didn't flinch. "I'm the one you'll answer to if you don't lower that firearm right now." The moment froze. Traffic stopped. Time thinned. because now it wasn't just a standoff between a town cop and a mysterious driver. It was a jurisdictional nightmare unraveling in real time under the gaze of cameras, live streams, and soon, cable news producers hungry for a viral headline that would drive ad revenue and subscriber clicks. The intersection of Destiny Tate finally stepped out, slow and measured. He didn't need to shout. He didn't wave credentials. He simply stood there. "Let him speak," he said to the agent. Then he turned to Beckett, whose eyes now darted between disbelief and the slow erosion of every assumption he clung to. "Officer," Tate said, "you just pointed a loaded weapon at a federal official with no probable cause in front of multiple live witnesses and your own dashcam. Take a breath and think." That was the moment of exposed power, not flexed by force, but revealed by discipline. A crowd had started to gather now. People from the nearby cafe, dog walkers, and a jogger pausing mid-stride. Phones were out. Whispers turned into murmurs. The words, "Is that real?" floated through the air like pollen. Every second became content. Every twitch a possible meme. Every word a potential courtroom exhibit. And yet, in the center of it all stood Tate, unarmed, unshaken, but undeniably in control. Not because he yelled, but because he didn't have to. Beckett's lips parted like he was about to speak, but nothing came out. Not orders, not apologies. Just breath. He looked at the crowd, at the phone screens held aloft like tiny judgment panels. His training hadn't prepared him for this. Not for the silence, not for the spectacle, not for the moment when the badge no longer protected him from the weight of his own decisions. His finger trembled near the trigger guard, then dropped. The gun lowered slowly, the barrel finally dipping toward the pavement. The response agent nodded, stepping forward and taking the weapon from Beckett's hand. "You're done," the agent said quietly. "Step back." Beckett stumbled as if realizing for the first time he was standing on a stage with no script. His earpiece crackled. "Unit 7 status." He didn't answer. A second agent approached, took his elbow, and guided him gently but firmly away from the scene. Beckett's face was a portrait of confusion wrapped in pride, and that made it more dangerous. He looked back once at Tate, who had not moved. Then the crowd shifted again. A woman stepped forward from the sidewalk, phone still recording, voice firm but respectful. "Sir, are you okay?" she asked. "Do you need a lawyer present?" The question wasn't condescending. It was civic, protective. In the era of viral police brutality videos, people knew not to trust silence. Tate turned his head toward her, gave a small nod. "I'm fine. Thank you for staying. Your recording matters." Behind him, the suburban agent moved swiftly, already coordinating with FBI command through an encrypted line. Within minutes, another government vehicle would be dispatched to escort Tate the rest of the way to the governor's meeting. Now, a lower priority than the containment of this moment. But for Tate, containment wasn't the goal. Exposure was. This wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about holding a mirror up to the mechanics of power. He walked past Beckett, who now sat in the back of a patrol vehicle, handcuffed. No longer an officer, but a suspect. That seventh explosion wasn't loud. It was internal. The fall from authority wasn't marked by a sound. It was marked by the click of a door shutting and the stillness of a man who finally realized his badge didn't protect him from his actions. Beckett didn't speak as Tate passed. He didn't plead. He didn't shout. He just looked down, maybe for the first time in years, and saw himself the way others had seen him all along. A man who had the law but not the justice. The truth is in the data, and then the eighth spark, the media vans. They came fast, tipped off by live streams, hashtags, location tags, and real-time alerts. Within 30 minutes, a local ABC affiliate had boots on the ground. Unarmed federal official held at gunpoint during routine stop. The Chiron would later read, but those on site knew it wasn't routine. It was a ritual. The ritual of suspicion, of pattern recognition twisted into prejudice, of power misapplied, unchecked, and untrained in de-escalation. Tate agreed to speak briefly, only a few sentences. Today's events are not isolated. They are symptoms of a deeper pattern we can no longer ignore. I am safe, but safety should not depend on titles. The soundbite would go viral, cut into clips, reposted on Instagram Reels, TikTok, and monetized YouTube Shorts optimized for high retention and maximum RPM. And still, the message beneath the virality would hold. Justice doesn't begin with titles. It begins with accountability. As the last agent secured the scene, Tate stepped aside, taking a quiet call. It was the Attorney General not asking what happened, but asking what Tate wanted to do next. That question would ripple forward into hearings, briefings, and policy shifts. But for now, on that Pine Line Street, it was enough to know the world was watching. And this time, the footage didn't come from body cams, doctored, or delayed. It came from bystanders who refused to look away. 10 feet away, Beckett still hadn't spoken. That silence, his final one, was the 9th explosion. It only took 18 hours for the footage to reach critical mass. By sunrise the next day, the incident had become a digital firestorm. Headlines blasted across platforms like wildfire. FBI Director held at gunpoint. Local cop sparks federal outrage. Reddit threads dissected frame-by-frame moments from multiple angles. TikTok creators looped the exchange between Tate and Beckett under hashtags like hashtag police misconduct, hashtag qualified immunity, and hashtag racial bias unmasked. YouTube commentary channels dropped 10-minute breakdowns with thumbnail screaming phrases like abuse of power exposed and this cop picked the wrong car, generating click-through rates worthy of ad revenue surges. But while the internet churned through its own cycle of reaction and monetization, a quieter but more dangerous wave rolled through Washington. The Department of Justice wasn't just watching. They were preparing. A profound truth overnight. An internal review task force had been activated. Beckett's personnel file was pulled and passed through a forensic filter. What emerged was a twist Tate hadn't expected, but would come to use fully. 3 prior complaints, all sealed, internally dismissed, all from drivers of color. In 2019, a Hispanic teacher reported being pulled over and ordered to lie face down at gunpoint for a busted taillight. In 2021, a single black mother was accused of driving erratically in the school drop-off lane. The final one, just 6 months ago, involved a military veteran in uniform stopped for matching a description with no follow-up filed. These weren't just unfortunate incidents. They were a pattern of racial profiling backed by omission and tolerated through silence. Beckett's department had quietly settled one civil suit out of court, paid for with taxpayer money, with no press release. When these files hit Tate's secure inbox, the weight of it wasn't just personal. It was systemic. Proved this wasn't about him. He was just the first person powerful enough to trigger exposure. Tate didn't respond with rage. He responded with strategy. He scheduled a live press briefing, not for optics, but to reclaim the narrative. The podium stood before a wall of flags, the seal of the Department of Justice cast in muted gold. No teleprompters, no political handlers, just Tate, steady as ever, eyes clear. This is not a story about one officer. It's about the space we allow for patterns to grow in silence. Accountability is not vengeance. It is the maintenance of trust, of safety, of law. The room was packed. Networks streamed it live. Social media reposted clips with captions like, "The calm before reform," and "When integrity speaks." But Tate wasn't finished. Behind the scenes, he had already forwarded the sealed files to a federal civil rights prosecutor requesting immediate review under Title VI. Not internal discipline, but federal criminal charges. That move was unprecedented. It turned a local abuse of power into a national legal precedent. Meanwhile, Beckett was suspended without pay, then quietly moved to a secure holding location. When contacted by reporters, his lawyer offered a pre-written statement. "My client believed he was acting within protocol based on vehicle descriptions and lack of registration confirmation. But the footage said otherwise. So did the audio. So did the patterns. The mirror of the future. The second twist came not from Tate, but from the public. The teenage girl who filmed the first live stream was interviewed by 3 major networks. Her original video had reached over 18 million views, monetized under YouTube's partner program, and sponsored by 2 civil rights organizations. Her quote became symbolic. "I didn't know who he was. I just knew it wasn't right." That unfiltered clarity hit harder than any editorial. Law students cited her clip. Advocacy groups used it in training seminars. Suddenly, digital witness culture was no longer fringe. It was the new frontier of public oversight. Tate used that momentum. He wasn't campaigning. He wasn't angling for sympathy. He was doing what federal law enforcement rarely had the room to do: set a standard. Less than a week after the stop, the U.S. Attorney's Office confirmed it had opened a formal investigation into Officer Beckett for civil rights violations under Federal Statute 18 U.S.C. Section 242, a rare but powerful charge that criminalizes the deprivation of rights under the color of law. It sent shock waves through the law enforcement community, not because it had never been done, but because it was being done now with evidence collected not by official cameras but by the people. The digital receipts were airtight. No tampering, no edits, just a timeline that showed escalation without cause and authority misused under the thin veil of suspicion. Meanwhile, Tate wasn't finished. In an unexpected move, he personally requested to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee, not as a victim, but as a law enforcement leader sounding the alarm. The room was packed with lawmakers, most of whom hadn't expected the director of the FBI to take such a public stance. His opening remarks were direct. "We have mechanisms for justice, but no mechanism to stop the routine erosion of trust between officers and the public. That erosion happens when silence protects bias, when footage replaces reform, and when apologies arrive long after the harm is done." He didn't use Beckett's name. He didn't have to. By now, the entire country knew the story. Lawmakers across party lines nodded in silent agreement. Even those hesitant to embrace systemic critique couldn't deny the footage, the evidence trail, the data. This wasn't politics. It was proof. A nod to the mission. Simultaneously, cities nationwide began reevaluating their local protocols. Departments in Chicago, Denver, and Raleigh announced policy audits. Bias recognition training and de-escalation review boards became the new terms flooding municipal budgets. Police union heads appeared on national television, some defensive, some cautiously optimistic. One notable comment came from a Florida chief. "If this can happen to the FBI director, what does that say about how safe the average person feels?" Tate's response came during a sit-down interview with PBS NewsHour. The clip trended across platforms, not for drama, but for its clarity. "You don't need to fear law enforcement, but law enforcement should fear the absence of accountability." Within 48 hours, that quote became a call to action in schools, advocacy groups, and even faith communities. But amid this national pivot, Beckett sat alone in a holding cell, awaiting indictment. Interviews with his colleagues painted a murky portrait. Competent but rigid, respected by some, feared by others. None outright defended his actions. One anonymous officer confessed he always believed he had to control a scene before it controlled him, but sometimes it was never his to control in the first place. The final twist landed in the form of a lawsuit not from Tate, but from the other 3 civilians previously profiled by Beckett. Their cases, once settled or buried, now gained new life. Attorneys filed a joint class action suit citing discriminatory conduct and unlawful detainment. The suit gained traction and headlines. More importantly, it reframed the entire narrative. This wasn't just about a powerful man caught in the crosshairs. It was about a system finally being forced to answer for every person it had ignored. And in that answer came a new form of accountability. Not reactive but proactive. Because the twist wasn't that Beckett had finally met someone with more power. The twist was that the system itself, once opaque and self-defending, had finally been made visible. And in that visibility, the people found not vengeance but clarity. When the courtroom doors closed behind him, Beckett didn't look back. His uniform was gone. So was the badge. What remained was a man stripped of his shield. Not just the physical kind, but the kind we wear when we believe we're right because no one's ever told us we're wrong. His sentence wasn't lengthy, but it was definitive. A conviction for civil rights violations. No more patrol. No more procedural immunity. Just time and a record. And outside the courthouse, Director Marshall Tate didn't stand at a podium. He stood alone in the quiet shadow of a federal building, breathing in the slow, deliberate air of resolution. There was no victory speech, no personal triumph. The system had worked, but not because it wanted to, but because it had to, because cameras rolled, because people cared, because silence this time was not an option. In a later interview, when asked what moment he'd remember most, Tate didn't mention the gun or the courtroom or the headlines. He mentioned the girl, the one who filmed. She didn't know who I was, he said. She just knew what was happening wasn't right. That's citizenship. That's democracy in motion. It wasn't about viral views or justice hashtags. It was about conscience. Beckett, meanwhile, gave no interviews. He declined to appeal, but one letter surfaced, leaked from a journal entry during his time in custody. In it, he wrote, "I believed I was defending the public. I see now that I was defending my fear." There was no excuse, no dramatic apology, just a man beginning to name the very thing that poisoned his decisions. Bias unchallenged, authority unchecked. In the months that followed, policy reform spread slowly but surely. Departments installed third-party review panels. Traffic stops required body cam justifications. Training curriculum shifted from dominance to de-escalation, from protocol to psychological readiness. Tate continued his service, not with bitterness, but with clarity. He spoke at universities, sat with civic leaders, and helped draft a bipartisan bill that would allocate federal grants to police departments prioritizing community-first policing and implicit bias education. But the moral wasn't just written in policy. It echoed in households, in classrooms, in quiet conversations between parents and children about what justice looks like and, more importantly, what it feels like. Because the ending wasn't about Beckett's punishment. It was about the millions who watched, listened, reflected, and asked, "What would I have done?" There's a line in Tate's speech to the Senate that never made it to headlines but stayed in the transcript. A line meant not for applause, but for memory. True power is not the ability to command fear. It's the courage to face the mirror before someone else holds it up. That mirror was held up. The world looked in, and this time it didn't look away.